the closest place to the gates of hell is politics, and God tells us to go to the gates of hell.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. The ultimate goal of this podcast is to inspire and inform individuals who want to make a difference. The variety of backgrounds of the folks we hear from every week really drives home the fact that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you're born with. You can make a difference. Work ethic, tenacity, and love of service are the common denominators that absolutely talk about every single one of the guests that we have on. Our guest this week has those traits in spades. Dan has worked on political campaigns since 2007. After climbing his way through the ranks from a grassroots volunteer to campaign manager of multiple state and federal races, he discovered he wanted to broaden his ability to help others find solutions to complex challenges that they face, which led him to starting Haven Strategies, a strategic consulting firm. He's worked on everything from the presidential to county level races and always believes in running like you're 10 points behind. You can run scared or unopposed, so if you're opposed, run like you got the devil chasing you. Like myself, Dan is a student of Zig Ziglar, Dale Carnegie, and Sun Tzu. He leverages the lessons these men have shared throughout his life, but he believes they make a big difference on the campaign trail. Here before recording the podcast, we spent about half an hour nerding out about Stonewall Jackson and Civil War and Napoleonic Wars, and we both are big fans of looking at the way that military history and strategy inform our views of campaign strategy and how we help win races. Right now, Dan lives in Roanoke, Virginia with his wife Rita and their 3 daughters, and they're actually expecting baby number 4, a little boy, the first boy in the family, come December. So Dan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on today.
Raz, I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I had a blast nerding out with you before we started recording about Stonewall, the namesake for my son, and about military history and the role it plays in campaigns. Let's talk a little bit about, at the beginning, about your story, how you got where you're at, and how you got plugged in on the grassroots side of politics and building the resume you have.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a Republican household. My dad is a proud Republican, and he's from a long line of proud Republicans from West Virginia, of all places. And, his grandfather was a proud Republican in West Virginia during the New Deal era, which, if you know any of the history, was kind of a physically dangerous thing to do.
That's a lonely, dangerous time to be a Republican in West Virginia.
That's right. He'd take his Colt 45 to the polls to make sure he could vote,
Wow.
without the guys beating him up. And he was actually an evangelist in West Virginia as well. And he'd have to, go on the circuit with his Colt 45, put it on the podium before he preaches, and just make sure everything's all good. So
I love it.
My dad kind of is from that line of Republicanism, and it kind of passed it down to me. I remember, watching the Bill Clinton, scandal and all that on C-SPAN growing up. My dad yelling at the TV. He's a pastor, but we all have our vices, and so I grew up doing that. A lot of the military stuff, the military history in my background. My dad was also a Vietnam War veteran, and so growing up, my bedtime stories were, I'd ask, "Hey, Dad, can I have a war story from your time in Vietnam?" And he shared it, and I grew to love, history, military history, but also politics. I didn't expect to go into politics, though. It was never my design. I went to Liberty University to study religion. I got a Bachelor of Science in Biblical Studies, and that really helped me to research and learn how to research. But after I got out of college, I had a passion. I had volunteered for political campaigns in 2007 for president. I had just always magnet attraction to politics and news. And, I prayed about it and just said, God, you've given me this passion. What do you want me to do with it? And so my life took a big shift in direction. I was going to go into the pastorship. I decided to go into politics. You might think they're, so diametrically opposed. But, there's a Southern senator that used to say, the closest place to the gates of hell is politics. And God tells us to go to the gates of hell. So, my life took a shift. I felt like I had an opportunity to go into a kind of a dark world to maybe be a light for God in my community. I'm by no means perfect, and there are very stressful situations on campaign trails. I think if there's a, political bio on me, people might say, well, he wasn't always perfect. Yeah, it happens, but I try to be a light for God in my community. And as I phased into consulting, I did that because there are a lot of bad consultants out there. Yes. There are some really good ones, but there are also some that are really just the end thing in mind is how they can line their pockets. And I wanted to do with my business partners is to do what is best for the candidate. And sometimes that's not even charging them, saying like, you don't even need a consultant. Just take this model and run. So that's kind of my political history. Went to LU, graduated, got involved with the Young Republicans, and then wrote a little bit for Red Alert Politics at the time. And then I got an interview with Congressman Goodlatte's campaign over here in Roanoke. The campaign manager hired me, which I appreciate him forever. He's actually campaign manager for candidate Gillespie running for governor here in Virginia. He saw something there, and I owe him a debt of gratitude for that. So that's how I got into politics. Ran Congressman Goodlatte's campaign, served as a legislative aide for Senator Ralph Smith here in Virginia, and then ran a campaign for state senate for David Suderline, and then started and ran some contested primaries and for Congressman Goodlatte and contested general elections. So that's kind of how I got here and started this consulting firm this year in 2017. So it's a new thing for me, but I'm enjoying being able to sit down with people, and I really found that I just enjoy helping people fix problems. I just get from business to politics, but be able to just sit down and game plan, like, what's your obstacle? Let's strategize over this. So that's kind of my background, my story a little bit.
Well, there's a lot that we share in common across the board, but especially when it comes to our view of why we do what we do and having a strong mission there that's informed by more than a bottom dollar. I mean, we both got wives, you got kids, I'm fixing to have one, we got to pay the bills. But at the core, I've always felt like this was the field that God called me to toil in, right? He said, this is where I have for you to work. And so, as a Christian, I believe that we're told to shine our light no matter what you're doing, whether you're digging ditches, plumbing houses, helping elect candidates, or serving the ministry. That it doesn't really matter. That's where you're called to serve, and you should reflect your Christianity there in an overt way, just through being different, right? So we should be weird. We should be seen as different by the world around us. If we're not, then we're doing something wrong. And so as such, my goal, if I'm supposed to work in politics, is to be the best that I can and try to have the biggest impact possible. And when it came to deciding about my consulting company and the types of candidates that I would work for, that informed it heavily as far as setting up firm boundaries as far as these are goes and no-goes for me. Talk a little bit about, as you were shifting from working for candidates to the consulting side, it's kind of a recent thing for you. What what types of candidates do you look to work for, and what's kind of the way you view your consulting company and the role you want to play?
Well, the type of candidates in terms of a political level, I'm not gonna run someone's campaign that I, don't share at least 80% of their values. If there are some core values, I'm very pro-life. If there's someone, I would never run a pro-abortion person's campaign. I would never run a campaign where someone was just okay with raising taxes. Those are kind of like your main core values as a conservative. I could not do that. So, but on the other side, I want to be able to help candidates out that share my values, that are conservative, that are going to shine a light into their community. I want to be able to run the most conservative candidate possible that has the opportunity to win, that can be a good standard bearer for the Republican Party, that can basically represent our values well. Even in losing races, if a candidate reaches out to me and they're in a deep blue district, and they're going to run no matter what, I want them to run the best campaign they possibly can to show those Democrats who we are, make some inroads in this community, and maybe help the top of the ticket out. If we're in a contested statewide race or something like that. So probably the 80% line is where I stand. There have been opportunities for me to work for candidates or to help PACs that are helping candidates that I just abhor their values and views, and I've turned those down because money in the pocket's fine, but I have deep-seated principles that I really just wouldn't be able to live with myself with. And I don't know if there's a lot of consultants out there. It sounds like from listening to your podcast there are a lot, and it's been a good eye-opener. But there are some that I know that would just take. It doesn't matter. They've taken everything from the most far right to the most moderate, the most extreme campaigns that I just probably could never do. But that's kind of, we'll see if it's a good business model. I'll find out.
Well, I think that Yeah, one, that it can be a good business model. At least that's my hope. It's worked well for me so far. It definitely I don't know that it gets easier to turn down the money, but I'll tell you what, it sure helps you sleep well at night.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're doing what you're supposed to, you're not watering down your impact overall by taking the quick buck for somebody that doesn't support your view of where the country should be headed. I feel like you sleep better at night knowing that, and I really think that over the long term, and just kind of talking to the young people that might be thinking about getting into consulting or getting into politics, that plays so heavily in establishing your brand, because you got to have a strong brand, you got to have something that you stand for, and you want to be somebody that when folks look at you and they look at your resume, that they know exactly who you are, they know what you stand for and what you're going to fight for. And thankfully, I was very blessed in the first handful of jobs and bosses from Drew Ryan to Ted Cruz that I worked for. There's not really a whole lot of question. If you're on the liberal side of the party, or you're in the mercenary consulting world, you're gonna look at my resume and know Raz is probably not the guy that we can go hire. And so you're not gonna waste your time. So that means that I'm not gonna be tempted, because they're not gonna waste their time on me, which I found to be very helpful. It limits the opportunities for me to make a mistake when nobody's going to call me about the mercenary side of things. And I think that it helps when you're talking about helping the right people. They don't have to wonder if they can trust you, because the kind of people that I want to work for, that I want to work with, that I want to coach, that I want to consult for, they're the ones that I've been in the trenches with. And so they're going to look at my resume, they're going to look at your background in grassroots, at your motivations for running and the types of candidates that you work for. And it becomes very clear all of a sudden, this is what Dan's all about. And that's what I'm about. And he seems like the kind of guy that I want to work with.
Yeah. And a lot of times, it never consciously really did this, but whenever I have an opportunity to work for a candidate, my mind always goes to my wife and my kids. Like, would my wife be proud of the actions and the words that this candidate takes, that I help put forth their message? Are they going to be proud of that? And that's kind of like just in the back of my mind, it's always there. So, will my kids ask, well, Dad, that's on the news, you're working for him, and I've been blessed to work for Congressman Goodlatte for quite a while. And he's just, a really great guy, and he's great friends with the family, and my girls love him. And I kind of want that relationship with all my candidates down the road, just people that, we can have good, positive relationships with, that my family can be proud of, that I'm working for.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. A lot of consultants, they live or die by their win rate. As far as that's the metric that they look to as the end all of what they are there to do and why you should hire them. And now, look, I want to have a good win rate, and I think that as you're looking at consultants to hire, win rate is definitely a factor. But the thing that matters more to me is I want to look at the long-term impact, because as a coach, as a consultant, my goal is to get you elected. And that means you're going to be there for a while. And once you got elected once, we know the power of incumbency probably helps you hang on there for a while. What I want to do is I truly judge my success or failure by what you're doing for 8 years from now, what your long-term political impact is, because that's what I'm there to enable. I'm not there just to help you get elected and get that certificate that says that you now are going to get that title. I want to make sure that I'm helping people that have a long-term political impact for good. And I've had failures there. I've helped elect people that a couple years down the line, I see them go sideways and they disappoint me. And like I tell all my folks, when I go to work for them, it's like, look, if all of a sudden you start betraying the things that we agree on, that we hold dear, I will work against you as hard, if not harder, because now I've been betrayed, than working for your race. So know that this is what motivating me. It's not just the short-term win for you. It's a long-term win for the policies, because elections, the campaigns, those are a necessary evil, right? This because we do this because we want to see long-term policy ends. And that's what we have in common with the folks we work with. And if all you're in it is to win and get the title and get the prestige and those short-term political wins, then you're probably not the kind of person I want to work with. We got to agree on that long-term stuff.
There's a notion out there, even in Republican circles, that, you should keep, morality out of politics, morality out of policy. But the truth is, all politics is moral. All policy is moral. There's a moral argument on the left. Raising taxes is good for people. There's a moral argument on the right. Lowering taxes is good for people. Raising taxes harms people. And you can go on down the line all the way to social issues. So politics is moral. and you're putting forth a moral argument. If you're running a good campaign, you're putting forth a moral argument for your candidate. So I can't be with a candidate that I'm morally opposed to. It just
Right.
doesn't jive with me. And I think the most winning campaigns are the ones that can convey a moral argument, the fact showing that they have a moral high ground. And Napoleon Bonaparte, of all people, said that the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. He knew that winning battles, winning wars, the country that wins is the one that has the moral high ground, or can at least give an argument and be perceived as having the moral high ground. And you can see that all through our geopolitics, and it applies to political campaigns as well.
So when you're looking at a campaign, so let's say you've taken on a client and you're trying to figure out, your campaign strategy, so your general how you view campaigns, and plug them into that framework. So talk about the framework that you view campaigns through, and what kind of those first steps are when you're bringing on one of these rock star candidates that you're working with.
Yeah, so generally I sit down and kind of just get an idea of who they are, what's their story, because if they're going to be in politics, and politics is telling a story, they need to be able to tell their own story. So if they have a compelling story, I want them to just hear what they have to say and get a jive, what their values are and what their background is. And, if I really like them, I think, all right, let's game plan this out. And then, basically we start, in terms of game planning, I start with election day. How many this is the nitty gritty stuff,
Yeah.
but how many poll workers do we need? And when's the last mail piece need to go out get out the vote? How many volunteers do we need the last 10 days? And you work your way back. Mm-hmm. When do we need to go up on TV if we're doing that? All the way back to the beginning. And the beginning is, it's 4 boxes. And they teach us at the Leadership Institute. What is your message about yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is your message
Leesburg
about
grid.
your opponent? The Leesburg grid, exactly. What is your opponent's message going to be about you? And what is your opponent's message going to be about themselves? And that helps you framework everything. And so they tell you at Leesburg grid, put down 3 or 4 main points that you're going to talk about yourself. If you're going to talk about your candidate, which sometimes you don't need to, if you're an incumbent especially, and you're well ahead, you don't even need to talk about your opponent. But in what ways are you going to compare yourself to your opponent, and so on and forth. So getting your message down, getting your history down, that's usually the first meeting, and I lay out kind of how much we're going to spend, and what technology we're going to use, what outlets are we going to use to get your message out. And primaries and general elections, it's a simple formula. You create a vote goal based on the historical data, and you want to get as many IDs compared to that vote goal. And that's really it. How are we going to get positive IDs? And there are a lot of campaigns out there that are very inflexible and one size fits all. But a campaign in Northern Virginia is going to be different than a campaign in Southwest Virginia with the mountains. If we got to get IDs at football games, we're going to get IDs at football games. If you get them door to door, you're going to do it door to door if that makes sense. And so that's kind of like what it all comes down to. And what I usually tell the candidate at the end, when we've got a full team, I tell the candidate, you need to be doing 2 things: talking to as many voters as possible and raising as much money as possible, because you can't save the world if you can't pay the rent.
Yep.
And a lot of new candidates don't enjoy raising money. I don't enjoy raising money, but it's a discipline. It's a discipline thing. You have to discipline yourself. And so when I'm looking at a candidate, I see, are they going to put the work in? Are they going to have a good, strong message? And are they going to kind of listen to what I say to some extent? Because the best candidates I've ever worked for are the ones who say, okay, am I doing what I need to do? What else do I need to do? And the ones that constantly learn. And Congressman Goodlatte, learning under him, he is pretty much your ideal candidate. You never have to write a speech because he's just got it in his mind. But more than that, he's disciplined. He raises the money he needs to raise. You don't have to ask him to do it. And he goes where he needs to go. And after every single event, he says, what can I be doing differently? And so you want a candidate that is teachable, disciplined, and is going to put the work in. I think those are the 3 criteria for candidates. Are you going to have the fire in the belly to push it through even when all the polls say no, all the money is out over your head? Are you going to be able to push through it and put the grind in to work? Are you going to have the grit to stick through it? Because there's some really dark times on campaigns, and sometimes it's in your head. You're just looking at tea leaves, and it's all in your head, and that gets you down. But you have to have a candidate that can push through that.
That's a really good list of things that they've got to have, because that's one of those things. Once you have an incumbent, it's so easy to get locked into this idea that I got here, so clearly I know what I'm doing, and I really don't need all that much advice now because I'm a rock star, and yeah, you might have helped me get here, but I'm probably here because I was just awesome.
Right.
And not only is that bad, even if it's true for you to latch onto that, but it's probably not true. And I remember, when I was working for Senator Cruz, after every single event we did, whether it was a small event or talking to a couple of donors or a big speech, one of the first questions that he would ask me when we got off stage and we were headed out, even oftentimes before we got to the car, is like, okay, how'd it go? What could I do different? And he actually wanted constructive feedback. He wanted you to tell him that this was a specific thing that you should definitely keep doing. These are things it didn't really go that well, or this is something I didn't know. I noticed the audience did not really like. Maybe it worked better when you said it this way at this other event. And he wanted that feedback because he understood that, one, we were hearing his stump speech more than about anybody, and we could understand the dynamics of the room, and we could view things from off the stage in ways that he couldn't see. And so I think that's a key one that I want to focus in on, because your ability to know that you can always learn. That's something that a lot of candidates lose out on and lose sight of, especially once they've won a race. But it also helps me understand whether I want to work with somebody or not, is if they're willing to take criticism and understanding how they take it. And sometimes I'll straight up ask them, it's like, okay, so when someone tells you doing something wrong, what's your natural reaction? And
Right.
I like doing, in some cases, some personality profiling and actual personality testing on folks that I'm working with, depending on the level of intimacy that we're going to have, because I think that it's really important knowing how you work together. When you're looking at providing that constructive feedback and maybe coaching someone that's not terribly excited about hearing the negatives about themselves, what are some of the things that you do to try to help make that easier, help get them on board with that?
Well, I always tell them when I'm going into and I'm really upfront with them. I'm like, look, in this race, I will do you a disservice if I just say yes the whole time. So I'm going to tell you when I think you're wrong, and I'm going to provide advice when I think that I'm right, and that's my job. In politics, on the operative side, I think there's a tendency to be yes man or not upset your candidate, and I get that, and you don't want to provide excessive worry for your candidate when they don't need it. But you do your candidate a disservice if you don't tell them the truth, and you don't provide advisorship. That's the whole reason you're getting paid for it. So I just tell them, like, look, if you can handle the truth, then let's do this. And I'm going to lay it out. And when I think you need to tweak your campaign speech, or you made a really big mess up, we're going to have to talk about that and make sure we mitigate that in the future. If you're okay with me being brutally honest with you, I think we're going to be good to go. But that's a lot, and it's hard I think it's probably hard for some candidates, because these people are like, a good candidate has a great resume. They've been CEO, and a lot of times they've never been told no, or, you can't do that, or we don't have enough money, or, no, I'm not buying, another 10,000 yard signs. You got great name ID. We're fine. But there are ways to do that in tactful ways on my side too. And I think part of that is talking with the other people on your team, getting everyone on the same message, so you can provide a united front too. If you think it's going to be a real battle with your candidate, provide a united front calmly, and talk to the other advisors and make sure do we agree on this? Is this a strategy? Okay, well, look, let's have a united front with our candidate. But there's a tendency to be a yes man in politics, and in my mind, when I first got into this, and I was working with Congressman Goodlatte, who's chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, he's won many contested races. I'm like, how am I going to be the best servant for this candidate? My job is to serve him and advise him, and that's to not be a yes man all the time, and to provide my honest opinion when it's necessary. There are hills to die on, and if it's a small thing, I'm not going to die on it, and it's just picking and choosing the right moments to do that.
You mentioned earlier that there are those dark moments in a campaign where you're going to, oftentimes the candidate can get inside their own head. And I've noticed that a lot of those come down to when they feel like they're losing control, right? It's when you feel like you're losing control. And in my mind, you're never really in control of your campaign, right? You can control some variables. You can basically control how much you work, right? How little you sleep, how hard you work, how many doors you knock, or how many donors you talk to. You can control variables. But a lot of it comes down to, I think, understanding at the beginning, you don't actually control this, and having a checklist of what you're going to do when you start feeling that gut check, when you start feeling like you're losing control. right?
Mm-hmm.
I heard one time some older folks talking about how, slipping and falling in the bathtub or falling at home, it's not the fall that gets you, it's what you try doing to stop the fall, right? It's the flailing around and when you pull the muscles, it's the reaching out for something that's not going to hold you up, that's going to make you get smacked in the head. What do you do when you're talking to these candidates and saying, look, here's what you do when you start to feel that churn in your guts that says you're losing control?
Right. Well, my advice for candidates is to, no matter what, even if you're in the best district possible, run like you're 10 points behind. So from the get-go, you should be running with all of your strength and doing and hitting the checklist, getting around your district as much as possible, talking to as many voters as possible. When you go stop for McDonald's for lunch, shaking hands of everybody in that McDonald's, and then asking for the money and making those fundraising calls. So that's what you should be doing all through the campaign. And so when there's a dark time or we feel like we're losing control, we just have to take a step back and say, look, what are the fundamentals? Let's do a check on our fundamentals. How are our IDs? Our IDs are great. You've been getting around the district fine. You're doing everything that you need to be doing. There's nothing else we can do. And if we try to flail, that's kicking a barking dog sometimes. And, in campaigns for war and campaigns for politics, the way you win is to dislocate your opponent psychologically and physically and force them to take a decision that they shouldn't necessarily take.
Right.
And so sometimes we have to take a gut check. Are we being forced to make a move when we shouldn't be? So here's the fundamentals. Does this line with the three things we need to be doing? It doesn't. Is it going to gain us any votes? Is it going to change anybody's opinion? Okay, we're not going to take that decision. Mm-hmm. We're not going to move that direction. And it's just sticking to your message. Campaign communication, just sticking to your message and repeating it. And you have to take a real long, deep, patient look. If you're about to respond to something or say something or try to do something, if it's outside of the parameters of our message that we put in place 6 months ago. And if it is, we have to take a long, calm look at it and think. I sometimes think overnight. In politics, speed is everything, but sometimes it's good to take a moment and just take a breath and say, look, our fundamentals are good. We don't need to do that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important roles that a consultant or an advisor plays, is making sure that you're not taking rash action. Because the candidate, they're out there talking to these groups, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a candidate they've got back from some town hall or from some coffee meet and greet, and their hair is on fire about something specific. And they're like, we got to get a statement out on this, or we got to go do this. They just told me that this is why we're going to lose. If we don't do this, we're going to lose this county. And you look at it and say, okay, let's pause for a second. Like I said, how are our IDs? How's our dollars? Are we staying on message? And if you're staying good with these fundamentals, then you don't need to get rushed off of that position, because it's just going to distract you. If your campaign's running well, don't get pushed off target by the little things. Mm-hmm. And especially don't do it without forethought, because sometimes you do get there's a lot of good information you can get through those mediums. And sometimes it's stuff that it actually does change the direction you're going. But you gotta push pause and say, okay, like I said, speed is everything, but waiting a couple hours to come out with a well thought out response versus taking quick action, there's a qualitative difference in how you're going to be able to keep your campaign running in the right direction. And sometimes taking that little bit of time is really, 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 really important.
Right.
And one of the things I've noticed is that, especially when you're talking about, especially below the congressional level, but even some at the congressional and presidential, it doesn't take long to look back through responses to different things that happened on the presidential campaign trail last cycle in 2016 to say, you know what, this is something they should have waited about 2 more hours on. They should have had a little bit more time to think and let this thing rest before they took action on it.
Yeah, and it's hard because in that environment, especially, the press was in a frenzy, as they kind of are now, but the press was in a frenzy. And so anytime that President Trump would take an action or make a statement, they would be pushing and pushing and pushing candidates to get a response. You haven't responded. But our view was to take some time and assess the situation, find out the facts. Are these reports true? Okay, well, then what's our response?
So, Dan, one of the things that I love spending time on is how do we increase the efficiency of a campaign operation, whether it's through design systems and processes or through just kind of braining people with the idea that we need to be saving time and saving money at every possible opportunity, whether that's the candidate's time, staff time, volunteer time, just making efficiency a core value of the campaign. I know that's something that's really important to you. Talk a little bit about how you do that, how you embed that in the campaign, and ideas for how folks can actually save that time.
Yeah, I'm a huge kind of efficiency nut. I like to, even down to like, let's go to the park, kids. What's the fastest way to get there and the least amount of time? And can we get our shoes on within, like all that stuff. Like even with my wife, I get frustrated and she's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, that was just so inefficient. So applying that to campaigns, I think I basically just drill in the principle. And different campaigns require different processes. But if on a congressional campaign, if a field director or something asks me, I want to go deliver these 50-yard signs to XYZ, I'm like, okay, well, what can you do on the way to fill in that time and make it efficient? What stops can you make? What can we build into this plan to make it the most bang for your buck? Okay, since you're going there, so and so needs something. Good to have a meeting with them. Do this, do this, do that. Because if you're taking any time away from contacting voters, it needs to be very valuable time for field staff. And it's the same for the candidate. So for the candidate, when he's driving, he or she's driving, okay, or being driven, what can you do in that meantime? Well, there's a good opportunity for you to make donor calls, check in on emails, and read this report that we just wrote for your upcoming debate and get prepared for your debate. And just filling in that filler time. And so for myself as a operative, I'm all about filling in time and not having any useless time. What can I educate myself on from this drive, this 2-hour drive from here to here? And that generally is some kind of podcast or something that can, stimulate my mind and create ideas and stuff that I can, fill it with useful time. Because you don't have a lot of time in the day.
Right.
And especially in a campaign, you will pray you had more time, and you never get anything you want done in the last 10 days especially.
So when you're trying to increase this efficiency of the campaign, one of those things you can do is by starting out with a really good team. And there's a couple parts to that, right? There's the kitchen cabinet and the internal advisors that are helping the candidate and helping you and helping really try to make sure that bubble never really forms on the candidate. And there's also the people that you bring onto the campaign as far as the staff side. And staff, I use it loosely because in smaller campaigns that they might be actual volunteers, but they're the dedicated people that day in and day out are part of the campaign team. When you're looking at how you're trying to frame that kitchen cabinet and the internal advisors that are part of that team, what are some of the things you advise a candidate to do? Like what kind of people, how should they start out by building that?
Right. One thing I'm a big believer in is that you don't have to be a political science major or master's or even any higher education to be a good, successful political operative, field worker, advisor. The two biggest things for me, when you boil it all down for campaign staff, is their attitude and their work ethic. Are they going to have a positive attitude? Because campaigns are draining, they're highly stressful, and if you have someone that has a negative attitude from the get-go, it is going to be cancer by the time you get to election day.
Absolutely.
And that's my biggest thing. I personally cannot stand complainers because really, everybody has it worse. I can't stand complainers, and it has a really bad effect on the entire team. Your nerves are already frayed. So when you have someone coming in and complaining about the heat, the office, yes, I know that's heat. There's ants everywhere. This place is about to fall down. We're all in this together. Be quiet. And one theme that was passed on to me is, no excuses, play like a champion.
Right.
It's grit. When you're out on a football field and it's just raining and it's humid, it's hot and bugs and gnats, and you're complaining, how is that helping move the ball forward? Everybody's in the same boat. So stop complaining about it. So when I advise candidates or when I'm looking at building a team, I try to gauge their person's attitude and try to gauge their previous work ethic. One of the guys that I've mentored, he's just one of the hardest workers in the world. He doesn't have a political education. He was a volunteer for years. He doesn't look like a political operative, but that guy got me 1,000 petition signatures, and our goal was 4,000. He did 1/4 of our work just by grinding it out. And after that, I was like, you deserve a job. Let's hire you. And the guy knocks doors like crazy. And it's in the little things that I judge you to see if you're responsible for the big things.
Right.
I came up through the ranks as a volunteer. And so I started out knocking doors and making phone calls. So that's what I value most. It doesn't matter, even on the political spectrum, on a team, I don't care where you are on a political spectrum, as long as you will represent our candidate well, as long as you are willing to work your butt off and have a good attitude. And that's kind of what I really try to look for.
One of my favorite stories from Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who I talk about in the Extreme Leadership book and the Jocko podcast. I love those guys. One of the things that they talk about is how, when they were over in Iraq, a bunch of Navy SEALs, they really had, some of these times a lot of folks were complaining. And what they would say every time somebody came out to complain is, nothing works, everything sucks, get it done. It's like everybody's in the, like, just like you're talking about on the football field. Yeah, everything sucks, nothing works. We're dealing with an imperfect world, and campaigns of all places, things are happening that we don't have control over. But what we can control individually is our response to those negative outside variables. So you say, look, yeah, it's hot outside, but we got a certain number of IDs we got to make this week, and that requires this many door knocks, and so I'm going to go knock doors. And one thing I can control is how many doors I knock this hour. Right? I can get out there for 8 hours a day, and I can knock a bunch of doors, and I can go talk to voters and control myself and make sure that I'm presenting as a good ambassador for this campaign. How many donor phone calls can I make? I may not be able to control how many dollars they actually get or how much we raise today, but I can control how many phone calls I make. So you look at those variables you can't control in those moments, because there are those dark times when you're going to get really frustrated and the campaign's not going the way you want it to. But what I always do is say, look, I first take a breath. I say, okay, I'm going to disengage. I'm going to get a little bit of perspective. What is it that's bothering me? I say a prayer. As a believer, I'm like, look, God's guiding this. He's the one that's in control. I'm not. So I'm going to ask him to help me come to terms with the fact that I'm not in control. I say, what can I do to regain some composure and make a difference? I'm going to literally take a physical break from whatever engagement I'm in. So I'm going to break contact, because I feel like I've been ambushed, right? So the first thing you want to do, once you're able to, is break contact with the enemy. So if it's a phone call, if it's my computer, I'll back away from it. I'll put it down, turn it off, say, okay, what's the actual problem here? What do I know to be true? And what's the actual difficulty we're up against? Because as we talked about earlier, when you're reacting in a way that's not planned, that's not appropriate, you're oftentimes going to get yourself in a bigger mess than you were in the first place. So you want to be making sure that you're not being moved into a worse position. So by taking a little bit, looking around, taking a breath, and then prioritizing and executing the things that you got to get done, that helps so much, or at least in my experience, it really helps me on an individual basis in my business and politics and campaigns and my family. Whenever I get in one of those situations where I start feeling out of control, those are the type of steps that I take. And it's a huge help to me to make sure that I don't make worse decisions, because that's when I've made the biggest mistakes in the past, is when you feel under pressure and you actually have time to maneuver that you don't take advantage of.
Yep. One of the quotes that sticks with me in all of this is by John Quincy Adams, I believe. It's duty is ours and the results are God's.
Yeah.
And that basically takes the pressure off. Do what you are able to do, and the strength you're able to do it, and don't worry about the results. And on a campaign level, for staff, it's just do what I tell you. Don't worry about the rest. We have a plan for all these. You just need to, don't worry about the other stuff. You do what you need to do and what's in your power. You don't worry about this extraneous stuff. That's my job to worry about that.
So Dan, you talked a little bit about the fact that you're a nerd about military history really informs a lot of your campaign strategy. Share a little bit about some of the favorite places you've gone to. I know you love some Sun Tzu. I know you love reading about Napoleon and the Civil War. Talk to me a little bit about some of those things, the areas of military strategy that have informed your view on politics.
Well, Sun Tzu is foremost. I read Sun Tzu before every campaign, so I don't know how many times I've read it, but I have my copy is written in the notes and all over the place, and there's just so much wisdom there for political campaigns. Even you would think, what is this? Ancient text. How is this helpful for campaigns? There's quotes like, "Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." So you want to win the battle before the fight even comes. What does that mean? Maybe for an incumbent candidate, it means raising a crap ton of money before the election cycle to make it, look like someone doesn't want to go against $1 million war chest. And so there's a number of things in Sun Tzu's teachings. But there's also a book on strategy by a guy named Liddell Hart, and it's a straight up military history book, and it talks about applying strategy to your campaigns. And one of the things that I've taken and tried to apply to campaigns is Basically, it's a quote. It says, "In campaigns, the dislocation of the enemy's psychological and physical balance is the key to victory." And also, part of making your opponent imbalanced is he has a quote that says, "The shortest way home is the longest way around." What is the most indirect path to get from point A to point B? And why is that important? It's because it will dislocate your opponent. They will not expect you coming from that example. And what the dislocation is meant to do is to create an action that your opponent will take that does not serve them well. Force them to make a decision that is not in their best interest. Force them to react to something that you're going to do or that you've done that does not line up with what their campaign message and strategy, the pillars of their campaign is. It also helps you defend yourself as a political operative, as a candidate. Okay, this kind of came out of left field. What do they want me to do?
Right.
How do they want me to react? Okay, I'm not going to react this way. I'm going to turn this around and react in an unexpected manner. So that's, the kind of stuff that I pull from, Napoleon Bonaparte, talking about the moral high ground. And that guides the candidate's message, because I believe the candidate that has the message that is a moral message is the candidate that's going to win. And that can apply to taxes and economy. It can apply to the most unusual things that you wouldn't think are moral argument. You think anything a moral argument, because in my worldview, everything is a moral argument. Lowering 10% taxes in Virginia is good for people, because that means that families and providers don't have to spend as much time away from the home, and they can be with their family and inculcating values into their children, and the children become better citizens. That's how you make taxes a moral argument. So that's kind of the military strategy that I've taken and tried to apply to politics.
Well, and that's one of those areas and one of the reasons why it's so important to take that breath and to assess the situation before you react, because oftentimes the idea is that your opponent wants to put you in a position where the most comfortable and natural reaction is the one that they want you to take. And so that by default means that if you're under pressure and you're looking for that opening, it's going to be a trap. And so whether you're planning out how you're going to try to move your opponent off of their comfortable position and where you want them, or when you're trying to analyze when your reactions to them, sitting down and thinking through a couple moves of how this is going to play out. What are they going to do if I do this? They've put me where this is the most comfortable position. What are my other options? And actually understanding what they are, and then say, okay, based on these options, let's start drawing out what the potential outcomes are. And very, very quickly, if you just take that breath and put a little bit of forethought into the possible actions and reactions and where it could lead, you're going to get much, much better at not putting yourself in bad situations.
Yeah, don't kick every barking dog is a public policy law from Morton Blackwell. You don't need to stop to kick every barking dog. And another, piece of truth from the military strategy side is basically time and surprise are the most vital elements in war, and I'd say they're the most vital elements in campaigns. Sometimes you need to react quickly. You need to be flexible enough to react quickly, and sometimes the timing is better to be delayed, or to see something is going to gain traction to it, whether even to respond to it or not. But surprise is very crucial. And we've seen that, honestly, in President Trump. You can say whatever you want about who he is, but during the campaign, it was surprise, 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 surprise. And you could just see that Hillary Clinton was totally psychologically unbalanced. The whole campaign was unbalanced. They had no idea how to react to this fire, from the other side. And there's a lesson to be learned there.
Yeah, I mean, he surprised plenty of people within his own campaign at times. We had Teresa Hong, who was his digital content director, on a few weeks ago, and one thing she talked about was that they were planning out their all their rollout for Mike Pence as their VP, and how he totally went and kind of had a Leroy Jenkins moment and just went out there and tweeted it out even before they knew it was going to be released. And that really changes because of his willingness to engage and to surprise people and to do things differently. It really changes the way a lot of people got to fight back against him, those that want to, because it's not playing by the same rules as you would expect.
Right, and it's also changing the way how the press responds. They still don't know how to deal with the surprises, and you can tell that the press is unbalanced as well.
That's exactly what you want out of your opponents, out of the people that you want to move them in a direction that you desire, and having them unbalanced. In this case, that helps President Trump, right? When he likes having the media unbalanced and acting in an imbalanced form and fashion, because that helps the narrative, help propagate the narrative that he wants to be, being ingrained. And so he's getting exactly what he wants from a lot of these folks every single day because he just simply has them unbalanced. In military, there's very clear dividends that get paid by that. You have a lot higher error rate on your opponent when they're reacting than when they are forcing you to react. Now, as we're nearing the end, one of the things I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about specifically the end of a campaign. So you talked about how that's where you start your planning. It's also some of the most important time. It's where you're spending most of your money. It's where you're actually determining whether folks are going to turn out to vote. So what are some of those things that you recommend folks put in place at the beginning that's going to help their campaign at the end? So talking about their poll watching operations, your get out the vote program, what are those things that you got to get right at the end of a campaign?
I think part of that is putting clearly delineated goals for your staff to meet, that they know the entire election. We need 50 volunteers in the last 72 hours to be out knocking doors. We need X amount of poll workers inside the polls. We need X amount of poll workers outside the polls. Putting those goals in place, because you don't know, where you are. You don't know where you're going until you know where you are. So throughout the campaign, they can know that they have an end goal of this amount that they need to reach. For the candidate, we know that we need to be raising X amount of money by 10 days out so we can hit our spending that we need to spend on mail, TV, radio, etc. I think it's just having the goals laid out for your campaign to be able to meet that. And then also just staying on message. It's just, I can't reiterate that enough. There are very circumstances where you really need to change your message. Now, there may be extraneous events that you can incorporate into your message, but your message is your principle, and the narrative is something that you build out of it. And just sticking to your message in the last 10 days out. There's no need to change. And actually, that's the time that you basically put the finishing touches on your message. In conclusion to my campaign, we've talked about this in the beginning. This is who I am. This is why I'm best to meet these values. Here, let's talk about these values more. What do I want to impact? Why does my background support this specific plank on my campaign? And finally, here's how I plan to implement those, and just reiterating and kind of wrapping up your campaign message from start to finish. Making sure your stump speech is finely tuned and you can recite it in your sleep.
Yeah, I love having clearly defined goals, and part of the virtue of planning from the end back is that you're able to break those down not only by gross end goals, but by weekly and monthly totals. By actually having a planned out budget, by having your planned out ID, persuasion, and get out the vote strategy, and having numbers attached to that, you can know week to week where you're measuring up. And you know all your volunteers, your volunteer captains, campaign manager, whatever sphere of responsibility and authority you're giving them key performance indicators that you're tracking. So every week on your call, you can say, okay, where are we at? What were our goals last week? How do we measure up against those? What do we need to do differently this next week? How far ahead or behind are we, and why? Okay, now let's make sure that we're making the changes in our operations to make sure we're getting back with those goals and staying on track. Because if you are, then you're in a wonderful situation, and then you want to keep there. But the only way you're going to know in those dark moments whether or not you're doing what you're supposed to is if you have actual numbers and metrics that you're tracking.
That's right. And it basically, by having goals in place and by tracking those goals, and it seems simple, but you'd be surprised by how many candidates go into campaigns that don't know.
Yes.
You know this, but like I said before, you don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going unless you know where you are. So you need to have the end goal and your current data tracking it. So if we need 20,000 positive IDs to meet our vote goal, we need to be tracking that all the way through. It's a surprisingly simple principle that people forget, but it's quite necessary.
Yeah, there's a lot of thought that goes into what you actually measure during a campaign. And there's some things that are very easy, right? The number of IDs, the number of dollars. But I always recommend folks, picking some other KPIs that they can track through a campaign that may be a little bit more non-standard, but that fit the culture of the campaign, so that they're able to, at any given point, okay, I call my campaign manager and I check in and say, okay, how many IDs we got? How many doors have we knocked? Those kind of things. What's our door open rate? What's our cost per door that we're knocking? Different things that you're tracking through a campaign that you keep your eye on, because what you're measuring from the consultant and the candidate position is what the people in the field are actually going to pay attention to. Right. And so by picking good things to measure, it means you're going to be really inculcating throughout your campaign this desire to meet your goals. And so they're going to be tracking that. You're going to be holding them accountable to those goals. And that means that by measuring the right things, you're going to be encouraging them every single day, even when you're not talking to them or when you're not pushing them. You're going to be helping encourage them in the right direction in a way that helps the campaign overall.
Right, and the main thing that I would usually disseminate to staff is just our IDs in a given precinct. By knowing, and I'm a nerd. I break down the biggest campaigns to the precinct level, and I put in a vote goal for every blasted precinct.
Yes,
and it gets a lot to track in an Excel sheet or something like that. But it helps when we're formulating our game plan and using our time efficiently. We're not going to go to the precinct that has 80% ID vote goal rate. We're good there. Let's go to the one that has 30. And by knowing that, we don't waste time in a precinct we are already doing great in. And so I basically just talk about IDs. And a lot of campaigns focus on doors, and a lot of times I feel like that having the doors knocked number is a way to help inflate things in your standing with your candidate.
Right.
And just some staff I've noticed, I don't care about the doors necessarily. I mean, it's good that we're leaving literature at this, and how many people to talk to. I care about the IDs because you can go out and knock 500 doors and get 2 IDs, and you had a terrible day.
Yes.
You can go out and knock 100 doors and have 90 IDs, and you've had a much better day. I care about your efficiency rate on the IDs to doors, and then also by having that tells you if you have people that are faking the numbers and things like that. But the main thing is actual, real, positive IDs. And it also includes, just trustworthiness. Like I tell my staff, if they're door knocking, if their job is to door knock, look, whatever you do, if you're having a hard day, if you feel like you can't get out there, don't give me false information.
Yes.
You would be doing more damage to this campaign by giving me false information if you just went and slept on your couch. So go grab a burger and take a break if you have a temptation to give me false information. Don't even think about it, and let's talk, because I've been in situations where a staffer was faking doors all election until a month out from the election.
Wow.
And it's just a gut check. You find out that they were at their home plugging in the data from their phone. And, great thing we have geotagging now. You can check that. But, it's just a gut check because all of your data is suspect from there on out. And you got to go in and rehash everything. It's double the work. And it's basically it's the field staffer stealing from the campaign and just being completely untrustworthy. It's extremely damaging. But, I like to share our current data in a staffer's given area so they know where to be most efficient with their time.
Yeah, I'm always a big fan of tracking that stuff carefully and letting folks know. I every time when I'm hiring a team of walkers or hiring a campaign staffer, I tell them that same type of thing. It's like, look, there's nothing that's going to come of good if you lie to me. At any point in the campaign, whether it's about data or anything else that you're doing, be honest with me. I've worked campaigns. I know stuff happens that is not according to the plan and that things are not always going to be rosy. But be honest with me, because here's the thing. You're going to get caught. You're going to get fired. You're going to never get a job again in politics. It's like you're here because you have the potential to make a big impact, and I want to see that happen. I want to see you win individually, and that this is going to work out to be a good right spot in your career that's going to help you get further down the line and make a bigger impact. That's what I want out of you working for me. But I can't do that if you lie to me. And so never let anything, just know this to be true, that if you ever have that lesser angel, that little devil on your shoulder that's telling you, hey, it would really be a lot easier if you just kind of stayed in your pajamas and sat on your couch and did this today, let me know that. Just let me know, say, hey, I'm feeling a bit tempted right now, and this is why. My girlfriend just broke out with me, and so I'm kind of down right now, and the last thing I want to go is put on a smile on my face and go talk to voters.
Right. We'll find something more productive you can do. I'm completely open, fine with it.
Yeah, we've all had those things happen on a campaign. We're like, this is outside of the campaign, or it's like, hey, somebody just reamed me out, and my confidence is low right now. I could really use something else on my to-do list that doesn't involve talking with people, or maybe I can't get my head straight to write to do the copywriting for this week's blog post or press release. let me know that. I mean, we're a team, we're going to work together, and stuff happens. But if you lie to me, that's one of those things that you're just not going to come back from. So Dan, tell me a little bit about Haven Strategies and what you do there for candidates, and what folks can reach out to you for help on.
So Haven Strategies is a group of friends of mine that we started this business, and we help any candidate from point A to point B, and it really doesn't matter where we're pretty much a full service consulting firm, and so we can run your whole campaign, be a general consultant, or we can do just your digital strategy. I've got a business partner who is really kind of a guru on the political digital side. We can build websites. We can do video. I mean, we do pretty much everything. We do all this for businesses too, if any businesses want to expand their marketing. So we pretty much cover the whole gamut.
Wow.
My specialty is strategy and general consulting. But we can advise on. We've got a good team where we have each a strength, and we can advise credibly on pretty much anything. So not to speak too highly of ourselves, but I really think we have a great team, and they've all kind of been up through the ranks, similar to my story, just as volunteers and then into paid work. So we do specialize in digital strategy. A lot of people have been reaching out to us for that. So that's kind of like in our wheelhouse right now. But we also do general advising for candidates. And if a candidate wants to just sit down and talk, we'll write out the game plan for their election. And if we feel that they don't need a consultant, they don't need to spend the money on a consultant, we'll be like, look, here's your campaign plan, just stick to it. If you need anything, call us. We don't need to take your money. We're looking to help good conservatives win elections.
Well, I think there's definitely a lot of listeners that should take advantage of that and reach out to you guys. Where should they go as far as website and social media contact information if they want to get a hold of you and ping you on Twitter, or to find out more about Haven Strategies online?
Sure. You can go to our website, havenstrategies.com. You can check me out on Twitter, DWebbVA, like Virginia, on Twitter. Check me out on Facebook. I'll friend you if you're not weird. And, you can email me at dan@havenstrategies.com. So those are all ways you can submit proposals online. You can use the contact form. Feel free to reach out. We love talking with folks, and we love learning from other folks too. We're constantly trying to learn new strategies, new technologies, to be on the cutting edge, to be able to service our candidates to the best of our ability.
I love it. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this week. You've shared some awesome information. I think two of the biggest takeaways are talking about the fact that all politics truly is moral. It all comes down to what you're doing and why. And I think that it's really particularly powerful when you make a moral argument about policy. And the second is just looking at your background, the same one that we share, saying, look, you don't have to be a political science background guy. You don't have to have that master's degree in campaigns, elections to be a campaign rock star. And we each know a lot of people that have come up through the ranks through various different backgrounds and have had a huge impact on politics and on elections. And I hope that our listeners will take both of those to heart. Y'all, thank you so much for listening and tuning in today. Make sure you go and check out the Facebook page, our website, mycampaigncoach.com. And I'll particularly love it if you would leave a review on iTunes. I always love hearing from listeners, and the feedback is much appreciated. So thank you guys for that, and we'll talk to y'all again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.